Um, so yeah, that's the story of Notch. And yeah, I think maybe now it's my turn to ask you a question, Manish, or if you want to follow that up with something.
I would like to follow that up with the Notch culture in Lahore. Uh,
Yeah.
your your book looks at courtesans, bards, and connoisseurs, as
Yes.
is written on the cover of your book, in the 19th century till 20th century,
Yes.
early 20th century.
Yes.
So, I think that's a fair amount of time to go back in history and look at the culture that was at perhaps at the epicenter, which is Lahore
Yeah.
at that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you can just like maybe touch upon how uh, the scene was in Lahore um, at that time.
Hmm. Um, I think I begin way beyond the 1920s, 1940s. I begin almost a century before that at the court of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. As we know, with music and dance and the arts, a courtly center is really important. And so Maharaja Ranjit Singh offered this space for, you know, nautch girls or for dancing girls, and he kind of employed them in very rich salaries. They were given very handsome jagirs and land grants, so they were a very respected group of performers. So that is, in a sense, with the establishment of the Sikh court, there was greater
Mm.
patronage for these dancers and singers, many of whom came from not just Lahore but from Amritsar, other surrounding towns of Punjab, but also especially from the hills. The Pahadi singers, the Kashmiri singers and dancers were quite prized. So Lahore became a sort of hub for these different performers and musicians to travel to the plains and settle down at the court, at the Lahore Darbar. Of course, the before this you had much before the Sikh Empire, you had the Mughal court flourishing about a
Mm.
century before, but before it went into decline. But Ranjit Singh revived these older traditions, and in fact, he made it even more creative, important. He started this troupe of women who would dress like Sikh soldiers called the Amazonian dancers, and they would wear a turban and have a bow and arrow and have weapons and dance in that manner in front of European travelers. So I'm just trying to find an image to show you these dancers. And this is one of the only images I could find, which shows you a performer holding a bow and arrow. And my interpretation is that this is likely to be one of the Amazonian dancing girls. Amazonian because it's referencing the ancient Greek female warriors from ancient Greek culture. So they were not really warriors, but these were dancers who did mimic mimic uh, martial combat. So this is the context of Ranjit Singh. And so once
But
this,
before, sorry,
yeah.
I'm just interrupting you there.
No, no.
Before we go on to that, could you tell us about Ranjit Singh's personal association with a particular courtesan whose name I'm not taking because you can tell us that lovely story about her on the pool and where the
Yes,
pool is. In fact, I think you have a photograph of that as well. So
yes,
let's start with talking about the main courtesan in Lahore at that time.
yes. So the main courtesan, the most famous was Bibi Mora, because she danced like a peacock. So her peacock dance was very famous. So she was called Bibi Mora. She was Ranjit Singh's first courtesan wife. She was a Muslim dancing girl from Amritsar. And Maharaja Ranjit Singh would go from Lahore to Amritsar for religious purposes, to go to the Golden Temple. But there are popular stories that say that he would stop at a site called in the village of Tanoa Kalan, which is today near the Wagah border. And he would
That
stop there and meet Bibi Mora, and she would dance for him. And one day, on her way to this spot where they would meet, Bibi Mora was coming on horseback, and her silver slipper, her silver sandal fell into the waters of the canal. And she was very upset, and she told the Maharaja, I will not speak to you or perform for you again unless you build me a bridge so that I don't have to, risk this again. And that is how Pul Kanjri, or Tawaif Pul as it is in the records from the court. In Persian, it's called Tawaif Pul, and in popular parlance, it's become Pul Kanjri. This was built, and with time, this is a photo of it today. Uh, Sorry. Uh, and it's a beautiful site which all of you should visit when you go next time to Wagah border. It's more fun than actually the Wagah border itself. And So this was a site built as a love memorial for this Ranjit Mora love story, a bit like Bajirao Mastani. And Today there is a war memorial on this site because of the wars between India and Pakistan, but it started out as a love memorial. Bibi Mora also built a mosque, which is now today is where the CRPF is sitting because it's near the border. There is a Shiv temple, there is a small Sikh shrine, there is a talab or a sarovar. So it became a spot which was a resting spot for travelers between Lahore and Amritsar. And is the architecture still survives. So I think this shows us how powerful Tawaif and courtesans were. And they left their mark on the built heritage. Like it's not just ki, wo gati thi, or it's not ephemeral ki once they die it's gone. In the case of Pulkanjri, we can see it's a physical
Mhm.
site that survives. उनकी एक और भी बेगम थी, Gul Bahar Begum, who was his second Muslim courtesan wife, and she was pensioned off. She was still alive when the British East India Company took over, and she was pensioned off with something like 12,000 rupees a year in 1849, which is a
That's a
huge
lot of
amount.
money.
So she was one of the richest, most powerful wives of Ranjit Singh. And she has a beautiful tomb, which she had sort of left enough money to build a beautiful tomb when she dies. So that is there in Lahore. And she was also from Amritsar. So we find these echoes of these women in the architecture. There is a, in Papad Mandi Bazaar in Lahore, there is a Maimora di Masjid as well. These were remarkable women, and I think उनके नाम पे उनकी जब शादी हुई थी रंजीत सिंह की with Mora, he issued a coin called the Mora Shahi Sikka.
Yeah.
And so as you've been saying, like we've seen um, in the show Hira Mandi, we see there's a famous line that Hira Mandi mein Malika Jaan ka sikka chalta hai. But in reality, this was like there was actually a sikka, actually a coin for Bibi Mora, which was issued by Ranjit Singh, which kind of angered
Did
many.
you manage to see the coin, or
I've
do you
seen
have pictures?
photos of it. Yes,
Oh,
I've seen
nice,
photos of
nice.
it. Yes.
Wonderful, wonderful. So सच में मतलब what they show in films is not too far removed from the truth also, in the sense that एक तवाइफ के घर से डोली भी निकल सकती है,
जी, बिल्कुल.
and she can be a रानी,
Yeah,
and उसका सिक्का भी चलता है.
बिल्कुल. बहुत खूब. I think we should now, I would like to move from 19th century Lahore to 20th century Calcutta, Bombay. And I think I was just amazed by the turning of the narrative. You say that, sometimes your mother would see herself as Meena Kumari, as the tragedy queen. But when you read the book, that's not the sense one gets. One gets the sense of a very resilient woman who refuses to let life kind of beat her down into a tragic life story, but she's kind of finding she's powerful, she is independent, and she makes sure she is she earns well, she's a performer, she is her name is well known in the performance circles amongst the patrons. So uh, I think this was for me the main line of our stories. In as historians, we are told that with the reform movement, the notch was abolished, or the dancing girls suffered, the tawaif, the courtesan as an institution finished. But when I read your book, I was so amazed to see that uh, having expertise in dancing and singing could be a career as late as the 70s and 80s, right? In
Yes.
India. So I think that was so amazing. So if you could tell me about how your mother was resilient, and I see a sense of joy and humor as well in her life.
Rather, her life is why I touched upon Bibi Moran. I asked you to speak about Bibi Moran and, of course, Gulbahar, is that their lives are not very different in the kind of uh, how assertive they are about themselves, how assertive they are in their um skill,
Yeah,
and they are sort of u- unified by um, this strong power to be independent and make their own decisions.
yeah,
So it's a um, I think it's a just passes on from one courtesan to another
yeah,
over generations,
yeah,
and it's something that they pick up from the the older lot. For example, my mother, when she was brought into this trade, she she wasn't born into a courtesan family.
no,
Uh, she didn't come with that. I mean, she's not a nepo kid.
no,
So
no.
in that sense, but she learns by watching, and she learns by watching women who are stronger and powerful and independent. And these are the qualities that perhaps somebody after her
Yeah,
picks from her.
yeah,
So the courtesan trade as such doesn't die. It's just that there are no the courtesans don't die or fade away. It's just that there are no takers for that kind of art anymore.
yeah,
People have moved on to, for example, they've moved on to the bars and dance bars. They've moved on to other kinds of entertainment. But
yeah,
and so if the courtesan culture has enveloped and it's sort of faded out, it's because
yeah.
people have moved on to other things.
Exactly. And I think I loved how when your mother moved, we'll go to other parts of her story, but I loved when she moved to Bombay. She moved to Congress House, which was the famous uh, place, which was the quota where most performers would be living, and they kind of unionized and called themselves the Bombay Sangeet Kalakar Mandal, right? To talk about their heritage as performers and to stop the harassment from these moral reform busybodies, right? Who would try to
Yes.
say that these are bad women. And at that point, your mother says that the quota was divided into so many different kinds of performers. So it's not just one kind of performer. There were the higher status Deredar Tawaif, the courtesans who were born into courtesan families and who were sort of they were with some reason they were slightly like, we are superior to you, we can sing, we can dance. Then there were women from the Bedni community. Am I pronouncing that correct?
That's yes, that's fine.
Yeah,
Barely.
and so your mother had to, show them that she's not exactly like she can combine both the skills of singing and dancing. She was a more skilled dancer than a singer, but some of the courtesans also took her under their wing and ensured that an ustadji would train her into singing better. So I found
Yes.
these stories of cooperation amongst the courtesans. It's like it's the lived story of your mother's life, which was so inspiring, and so it broke so many of these stereotypes which we see on cinema and on screen, which is that either the tawaifs are plotting against each other. Some of that is also there, this competition is there, but the stories of everyday cooperation, how you support each other's livelihood, that I thought was so good.
That is true, Radha. I mean, I feel like they do form, like you said, they do form their own union and are protective of each other. because in the end, what would they have other than each other? Because
Yeah.
you know, it's a space that's constantly being attacked by someone or the other, whether it's a goon or whether it's a reformer or
Yeah.
whether it's just a tyrant landlord, I suppose.
Yeah.
So and most of them are always men.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So and when why are these men attacking them or sort of trying to disband them? It's because these women don't need them.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
They've been doing their own cooking, they've been doing their own earning, they've been doing their own rearing of their children.
Yeah.
What part of like livelihood or living is it that they can't accomplish on their own
Yeah.
without the help of a man? So
Yeah.
that is under a threat for a man, and of course, uh, they have to stay unified because if they can't stay together, then it will all crumble. And
Yeah.
they are in a quota, they have these rooms, they of course they have a slight hierarchy. The Deredanis will of course say ki, we come from class and all of that. But it's and the Bednis are ones who sell their daughters or traffic girls into the trade.
Yeah.
Um, so but what happens when they get into a quota is that these girls realize that none of this caste, class, none of it matters to them if they want to survive
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so I think they become one, and that is something that the world is always uncomfortable with.
Yeah. Yeah, I just wanted to read out a small section um, from this, which exemplifies this cooperation. And in when your mom moves to a new quota in Calcutta, some of the older, more established wives think she's competition. But then I want to read out a few lines, if that's with your permission. Yeah.
Of course, please. You're
So on
promoting
page
the book.
74, it says, I sang only the first two lines of the hit song, ending it with a repeat of the first, Jise tu kabul kar le, as a plangent closure. So the other Tawaif, who was already established, she smiled. She probably realized that I was no competition. The next day, she sent her Ustad Ji, Amir Bhai, to train me in music. He was someone who could train his lineage to the Kirana Gharana. Um, and then she started sending, her name was Geeta, this other Tawaif. She started sending a few of her parties or a few of her patrons and audience members to me. It was the beginning of a long and beautiful friendship with the supremely talented women in the Kotha. They knew I was not going to snatch away their patrons who were serious listeners of classical music. If I give you a few, mere kam nahi ho jayenge. It won't lessen my work, Geeta said. She had a generous heart. The serious, mature listeners gathered downstairs, and the excited young men marched up to the terrace to my room because your mother was a very good dancer and had these vigorous dance moves. But what I love is that continuing on this page is how your mother was kind to older Tawaif who were fading. And she says, 3 months after my arrival, Malika Nigar, a Kawala who had a room on the terrace, returned from Bombay to Calcutta. She had been a great beauty in her youth. She had a full throated voice and had dabbled as an extra in films. But things had soured between someone whom she was in love with and turned her into a chronic alcoholic. I have always been friendly with the elderly, and for some strange reason, they too take a strong liking to me immediately, right? Um, and she
Yeah.
says, um, Malika Appa and I struck up a friendship within a few days of her return. आपके बाल बहुत खूबसूरत हैं, Appa, I said. You have beautiful hair. I had frizzy hair. She laughed and hugged me. She was so warm. She was back to re-establish herself, but who was going to come watch an aged has-been? I think she was aware of that, so she hung around my room all the time in the hope that my patrons would ask her to sing. I was also not inconsiderate when I had a surfeit of customers. Uh, I used to send the men to her room and asked them to treat it like a waiting room. Malika had hung glossy portraits of her in filmy poses on her walls. They were suspended in such a way that her bosom drooped like fruits from a bough. Which man would not like to wait in such a museum of tits? This arrangement suited Malika Appa. She served them snacks and drinks and tried to keep them engaged till I was ready for the mujra. Um, and then, it goes on. Occasionally, I would intersperse my performance with her kavali as fillers. Some patrons did not mind. She was fantastic, but how could an artist survive the lure of cheap imitation? She was an original. I was only mimicking Hindi film heroines. So it goes on like this, like this. And I mean, I'll finish the paragraph because it's so well written. Young patrons loved that sort of thing, the idea of possessing an unattainable screen goddess in the artless but sincere imitation by a local tawaif. Malika Appa did not mind that she did not get as much attention or applause as she deserved. She was past her prime, and she understood that very well. So I stop there because otherwise this can just turn into a session of me reading from your wonderful book.
Thank you, Radha. And I didn't realize that you would be reading this passage. It kind of tells us that there is another Malika Jan around who is actually quite nice.
Yeah. And I'm going to move to the beautiful relationship with religion, actually, that you note in the story about your mother making so many trips. Oof, sorry. Now I just assume that whoever joins will be a troll or something like that. Sorry. Uh, Right. So I just wanted to talk about your mother visiting places like Ajmer Sharif, visiting other like Hindu temples, and this very beautiful syncretic religious sphere as well, which is, I think, another feature. As academics, we can keep talking about how beautiful that was. That uh, uh, these spaces had all the like both the main religions, Hindu and Muslim traditions, were so beautifully reflected here. And there's a wonderful story about how an older Tawaif gave your mother, what is it? Something from Ajmer Sharif, wasn't it? And she said that,
Tabarruk, which is the
Tabarruk.
prasad.
Yeah, so Kamanda Lapa, a Tawai, who was fading, used to live nearby. She used to go to Ajmer Dargah. Once she gave me the Tabarruk, blessed holy offering, and said, Ye sirf naseeb walo ko milta hai. She said it with such arrogance and disdain that I felt small, that only the very fortunate get this. Or maybe that was her intention. She always thought no end of herself. I took the Tabarruk and joked, Naseeb ka kya hai? I will also go. I was adamant to make my own destiny, as I had learned to do when I broke free of Pushpa's stranglehold, was the woman who was controlling her. So after many months, then your mother dreamt of a dargah, she dreamt of Ajmer Sharif, and she actually made the trip all by herself, all alone on the train from Calcutta to Ajmer. And then she returned to Calcutta and offered the tabarruk to Kamandalapa. And your mother said, Apne naseeb se lai hu. See what my destiny got me, I said to her. She did not know how to react. Going to Ajmer prepared me to travel alone. I began traveling frequently. I went to Pushkar, which is a very holy Hindu site in Rajasthan as well, and many other religious sites. I began taking other bais along with me after a few years. Malika Appa, Meena, Geeta. Many years later, when Kamandal was old, she asked me to take her to Ajmer. Naseeb naseeb ki baat hai. It is a matter of one's destiny. So how the tables have turned. Uh,
True, true.
and your mom was like this traveling tawaif who was inspiring others to travel with her. So I thought that was so refreshing and uh, so much to be inspired by in that.
Because I think when she was younger, Pushpa would take her to uh, the Sabir Priya uh, shrine in Kalia, Uttarakhand.
Right.
Uh, I think that one, or if I'm mixing up, there's another one in Dhoraji
Horaji
in
in
Gujarat.
yeah.
So she had performed at these places in tents, and so she knew that the shrines were also a place for Tawa'ifs to not only not only go there as a devotee, but also find a sort of spiritual um, sort of awakening for themselves. They went to such places and they felt good about performing in a place where you would say probably that the women of such quota should not be present.
Yeah. Yeah.
But owning those places and being celebrated, earning money, and finding some sort of spiritual fulfillment uh, makes all of these tawayafs. And one, they're very secular; they'll go anywhere and perform,
Yeah.
whether it's a shrine or if you even call them to a mandir,
Yeah.
and they feel that connection, that
To the
they
divine.
have
Yeah.
to the divine. Yes,
Yeah.
in such places. And it I think it gives them a calling, it gives them hope, it gives them something to hold on to when back home in the Kothas they are being looked down
Yeah. Yeah.
by those who are around.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think just reading about the Kalyar Sharif shrine and Horaji, to know that there were these, these melas which we sometimes part of the urs, and
Yes,
the mela would be a space of joy and celebration. And as part of that, the courtesans would be called to also perform in some of the tents for the audience members. And it was, I loved reading about the Dhoraji, especially because your mother mentions how it was almost like a trance-like state, like the dancing, the audience was also of,
yes,
they're at a dargah, so they expect something a bit more intense. Um, so it was one of the most intense, like over 10 days, there was so much performance and a lot of money earned, but it was also very tiring for your mother, and she
yes,
decided not to do it too much because it was exhausting physically, right?
yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so now it's my turn. I should be asking you something. Let's move away from the wives in real life to let's talk about the representation of the wives in literature, which was happening. For example, in your book, you mentioned Kipling writing about an Amritsari girl.
Yes.
Um, could you tell us what he wrote? There's a specific line. I think you should read that. I found it quite lovely about generosity, which we've been talking about the generosity of the wives also in real life. It is mirrored and depicted in literature as well.
Yes. So I think this is from my book, from chapter on gender and reform in Punjab musical publics. And Kipling, of course, was an imperialist writer, but he was based for a lot of his lifetime in Punjab, and he wrote quite astutely about the real life courtesans and female performers he met. And the detail with which he writes about them is some of them at least is not as orientalized as the example of Lalun, who is the famous courtesan in his in his uh, book, in his short story on the
Or
city hall,
yeah,
which
yes,
is something I referred to in my critique of the Hiramandi show. But in Kim, for example, which was his masterpiece, Kipling's masterpiece, there is an Amritsar girl or courtesan who helps Kim, the protagonist, a small English boy, I think, or so I forget the exact details, but he's a European. Oh dear Lord, here we go. Uh, um, Sorry about that. Uh, so yeah, so she helps him out. So in a railway compartment near Lahore, the Amritsar courtesan is shunned by the peasant's wife, who is also a co-traveler in the coach. But Kim was certain of her generosity, pointing to the popular view of courtesans as being wealthy even in turn of century Punjab, which is 1890s. Kipling writes, the Amritsar girl stepped out with her bundles of money, and it was on her that Kim kept his watchful eye. ladies of that persuasion he knew were generous. So, as these wealthy and literate figures, courtesans, were really powerful. And this is something which a beggar boy like Kim is recognizing. And he's sure, and she does give him some money, which helps him further on his journey.
And
Yeah,
and since you're talking about money, on page 201, you talk about this courtesan earning money of a performance. Give us a rough idea of how much they were making at that time.
correct. So, how do, as historians, we find references to some of these performers? This is a case from a newspaper report from the Times of India from 1890, where an unnamed dancing girl, who I chose to call Karen, is a victim of robbery and physical assault by thieves on the road, which again shows you that she's traveling from Lahore to other sites close by. And apart from the legality of who assaulted who and all of that, as part of that, the dancing girl, the Tawaif, is complaining because she was very upset because the assailants, the robbers, had uh, given a mark on her nose, and so there's a scratch and a scar on her nose, which she says, quote, is likely to be a bar to her profession as a dancing girl because her looks are meant to be so important. And then she's giving evidence of why she is so important. She says, on all great occasions, her services were required at Jammu, Patiala, Bahawalpur, and Kapurthala. All these are princely states. At Jammu, she used to receive rupees between 5,000 to 20,000 rupees a night for dancing before the Maharaja. This is in 1890, right?
My God. Yes.
Rupees 2,000 from the Raja of Kapurthala. She also received large sums of money from the Nawab of Bahawalpur, whenever her presence was required. So, so
So
this,
she was really rich. The courtesan figure
yeah,
is really rich in the 19th century, but by the time we come to 20th century,
yeah.
is she making that sort of money?
I don't think so. I think the
Ah,
reform movement has slowly.
started.
1890s is also when these opinions on Notch question, Punjab Purity Association, all of it is starting at this time. Even if this Khairan is exaggerating a little bit in the court, even then it can't be too far from what she actually earns. Like even if we take it with a pinch of salt. So yeah. And the fact is she was assaulted by robbers because she had so much jewelry on her, so that
Mm,
wealth is visible on her person as she's traveling, which is why she's a target for
mm.
robbers. So this is yet another reality of women at that time who would travel between uh, courts to perform. um, but I think, yeah,
And would you say, sorry, would you say that after the Tehran incident,
yeah.
uh, a lot started changing in how public perceived a courtesan,
Hmm.
and they started clamping down on their lives.
Yeah.
Do you think that's when it starts shifting, and the decline of the courtesan really begins around then?
I think it's a slow decline, which is slowly coming in. And I think, as Professor Shweta Sachdeva Jha, who's at Miranda House in New Delhi, has shown, that with gramophone and with cinema, many courtesans adapt and, they take to these new technologies and they become radio singers. They have so many gramophone records which are cut in their names. We know the very first gramophone records in India are by Gohar Jan of Calcutta. So,
Right.
I think they adapt and move to these other spaces like cinema and radio. I mean, some of the most famous singers we have from in India, from Begum Akhtar, and in Pakistan to Madam Noor Jahan, or even, Mukhtar Begum and her sister Farida Khanum. All of them come from performer communities. They may not all come from the
Correct.
same Tawaif backgrounds, but they come from some kind of performer communities. And so, that explains the uh, the but often, when you have to enter these realms, sometimes you hide your courtesan origins or your mirasi origins, because
So
of
are you saying,
yeah.
so are you saying that because they were also becoming popular, then they had to be contained
Yeah, yeah, I think no, I think it was.
outside the quota? They were becoming popular outside the quota, and that's when, the reformists woke up and said, we have to contain this and this can't be allowed.
No, I think that began before, because
That began.
even before cinema and gramophone, they went outside the quota to perform at people's homes for
Right.
births, weddings, and other,
So that became a problem, and that's when it
So
started.
yeah, yeah. I think it became a problem because of colonialism. It like really became a
Mhm.
problem because of this idea of this is how we need to be, like these Western anglicized Goras. And
Mhm.
as we know that the for the Europeans and especially for the British, the dancing girl was they did not see any gradations. They saw all the wives as sex workers, which was not true, as we know from
But
our
why is that?
it's because first of all, the courtesans were public women, and this is
Mm,
something which threatened a very kind of sorry, a masculine understanding of the world. So I think
mm,
it went against European notions as well, and
mm,
this idea of this moral civilizational superiority, which was the white man's burden, which they came to India with. So this was yet another thing to say we are superior to the Indians, and look at these so-called debauched Indians. Look at this
s-
indolent Nawab. Very much the way we have seen in Hiramandi, Shekhar Suman's character is literally the indolent Nawab. He doesn't know what to do with himself. He's just, you know, he's shown as being really out of control. So this was the image, the stereotype which they put to say these rulers are useless. And it was used for Ranjit Singh as well to say he is an orientalized, good for nothing, because
mhm,
he so-called indulges in dancing girls. But the fact is, if you look at the records from Ranjit Singh's own court, they
mhm,
were part of the machinery of everyday running of the state. No darbar
mhm.
could happen, no political negotiation could happen without these singers and dancers performing. So they were auspicious. So in
Right.
our traditions, they had a positive connotation. As late as, going back to the Sufi shrines, as late as 1940s, at the Sufi shrines in Punjab, courtesans were dancing and singing. And there was a
But
bill in the Legislative Assembly which
yeah,
said
I was just coming to that. When did the anti-notch campaign begin?
it began in the 1890s, and it started
Mm,
actually in South India a little earlier with the with abolishing the Devadasis and abolishing temple dancing. So there
right.
was, in some ways, in South India, the reform drive was more successful because there in 1947 there was actually with independence there was actually a ban on dedicating girls to temples because they equated it with prostitution entirely and didn't, whereas in the north at least it wasn't banned. There were calls to
Mm,
ban it, there were calls to reform it, but it was not an illegal thing. So it started down south and then traveled uh, up north. But yeah, so the reform attempts they keep coming. So it like 1940s mein wo ho raha hai, that female singers prohibition bill, that
correct.
no woman, regardless, no dancing girl or woman can sing or dance with or without musical accompaniment at a shrine, at a Sufi shrine in Punjab, which means till that
But men can.
common. But men can. So there is the hypocrisy there, which is what we have
Right.
today. Mostly, you imagine you going to Sufi shrines, you can only see male kawals and singers. But not too
Yes.
long ago, 1942 is less than 100 years ago, uh, you had female performers singing and dancing at shrines. And in
So,
the debates, in that people are saying we can't ban them in a 5 mile radius around the Sufi shrine. Then someone else is saying, oh, but we can't do that because these dancing girls go to celebrate birth and weddings in people's homes. So we can't stop people from inviting them to their homes. So that shows
Right.
you that those practices were continuing. They just wanted to
So there
remove
was
them out of religion entirely, that these are not
uh,
religious or spiritual women.
so there is a queer angle to the prohibition also. I read in your book somebody saying that if these men watch other men perform,
Yes,
then it'll
yes,
uh,
corrupt them.
invoke, the, uh, it'll make them have homosexual tendencies.
Yes. So yes, so that is the critique of introducing ballroom dancing. So
Right.
some of the this is the Indian conservative faction saying that, we can't have ballroom dancing because how can we see men dance? Because this may then inspire desire. So it's interesting how the very act of dancing and singing is something which inspires
Is
desire. Yeah, in this world.
uh, so can you tell us also about the role of Paluskar, the one of the main guys in the
Yeah,
Hindu reformist,
yeah,
you know,
yeah. So
period.
so he was also from West India, like your mom and you. So from Maharashtra. Uh, but he
Oh
was
dear.
so he. I mean, I learned music in a Gandharv Mahavidyalaya. So Paluskar established the Gandharv Mahavidyalaya, which was a school for learning music, and he did he did something which was both positive and negative at the same time. He wanted to make sure that music is learned by people outside the hereditary performing communities, and every middle class, so-called respectable caste families should encourage their daughters to learn music and dance. Not maybe not dance, but music, because he was a music reformer. And so, in these schools, you can learn the basics of rag and the basics of Hindustani music. But he put it within a Hindu devotional mold and said, which meant that any kind of songs or music which was not like a bhajan or not pious was seen with negativity. And Paluskar started this, and it kind of took off and became even more strident. Because Paluskar himself trained in a gharana, so he learned from an ustad. So, I mean, but his vision was very much to say that these ustads are secretive and they don't share their information, but we need to make it democratic. Again, in response to, say, Western style of learning music where there is written notation. So Paluskar famously introduced written notation. Also, another guy, Vishnu Narayan Bhatkande, also did that, both from Maharashtra. Um, and it came with a caste respectability angle. They were both upper caste Brahmins. Janaki Bakle has written a very good book on them. And his first Gandharva Vidyalaya was in Lahore. So Lahore was the place where Pandit Paluskar found his first success and
Right.
started his educational or pedagogical agenda. So many young women would go and learn music from respectable, so-called respectable families. Uh,
And they also had a cure for men from Tawa'ifs by asking the women of the household to learn how
yes.
to seduce their men like the wives by
Right.
singing and dancing.
Correct. So that was another thing, that if the women learn music and dancing, these men will not go to the kotha. So they should instead, become skilled in the arts of the courtesan and try to keep the husband at home. So this was another logic to encourage women to learn and otherwise and to remove this negative attitude ke singing and dancing is something which only gaane wali or nachne wali do. So this
But
was.
in a way, they are equating all women as the wives.
Yeah, yeah. It's so interesting. This fear of women singing and dancing is such a pervasive fear. I mean, my mother is on the call, but she, thanks to her, I learned some music, and she enrolled me in Bharatnatyam classes as well, which is another whole story, Bharatnatyam and how that was sanitized and anyways. But music lessons, my grandmother, my father's family, especially my dadi, could not deal with it. So they were like, गाने के लिए भेजती है ऐसे नहीं करते हैं, and I'm someone who was born in the 80s, like whatever. So as late as the 80s, these attitudes would exist. And even,
Right.
so women singing is something which is in many parts of India, especially North India, it's still seen as a negative thing.
So, for women to be on their best or good behavior, there was a book of songs which I think you should show a picture of
Yes.
and
So
tell
that
us about it.
there's a great there was lots of books which were published in the 1920s and 30s to educate women in music and get them to sing uh, good songs, right? So one of these booklets was called um, Change Change Punjabi Geet. And of course, the sorry, can you see? In Hindi, it says Change into two Punjabi Geet. And into two is a common. Can you see? I'm not able to figure out the. Sorry, my dyslexia. Is that better, Manish?
It's fine, but I think this is to make the people here
Ah,
go get the book also.
yes. And you
It's a
can.
book with pictures.
It's a book with color pictures on the Kindle. So in these hard copies and all, there's no color. But if you buy the
Uh,
Kindle, you'll see all these in beautiful color. So
right.
in this Change Change Punjabi Geet, again, these were songs written for mostly for women, and there were lots of these ladies Sangeet Sabhas and ladies Sangeet clubs which started showing up in uh, in uh, um, in Lahore, and and you have Goddess Saraswati on the cover. I'm not sure you could see. And Goddess Saraswati is the most kind of chaste. She's a goddess. She's the goddess of learning and music. And so all these, they were trying to reinvent tradition. Another such booklet was my Bhagwati's uh, Abla Mati Veg Rodhik Sangeet, which was, she was an Arya Samaj missionary, and she said, "Jo sikhniyan hoti hain, which are sung on weddings, the sikhnis are very lusty, they're very sensual, and they're very popular amongst women." And this recalls some of the debates with Chamkila as well, which we've been having recently. But my Bhagwati transformed the lyrics into bhajans. She retained the melody, she retained the song, and so for example, there's a sitchni called Uddi Choli Jard Pase, that her blouse is yellow colored, which would probably have some very nice sensual overtones. It's a wedding song, but she changed it into Prabhu Ji ne agya ditri tusi karam kariyo. So this is all about God. So changing music to fit into a religious devotional mold was the modus operandi of these songwriters.
So, so the courtesan figure in literature, in music, in cinema,
Yeah,
uh, is also something that they've constantly feared because, as you said in the book, there's a quote about um, a traveler, I think, who's come to India and who observes the courtesan and says, "Is the courtesan the only educated or free female of the East?" Do
correct.
you think these women are the first truly free women of the East?
I think it would depend on the women who manage to carve out their freedom. Uh,
Mm.
uh, and I think in that regard, that is a constant theme even today. Like how many, even with feminism and all, how many women truly manage to feel free within all your patriarchal structures like marriage, ya jo bhi hai. So that sense of freedom, yes. Even in your book, in your mom's book, it ends with, she said, "Puri azadi hai as a tawaif." You don't have. It's not about forcible sex work. It's about as a performer who you choose to engage with. So in that
Right.
regard, the power of the performer was something which was deeply recognized. तभी तो इतने ये social reform movements to ban all of this was happening. And yes, the Tawaif were in, at least in Punjab, I can say they were amongst the only women who were educated and who were taught literacy, who were skilled in reading, writing in adab. And Dr. Leitner, who was the guy who did the educational survey in Punjab, he noted that even the lower class of the kanjari, of the prostitutes, they can also read and write. So if they can also read and write, you can imagine, then obviously the others, the higher caste or the higher status courtesans would definitely literate. And a good example of this is Professor Anshu Malhotra's book on Piro, who was who wrote kafiyan. She wrote 160 kafiyan, and in those kafiyan, she identifies. She tells her social location. She says, "I am a Kanjar Veshwa." She says, "I am a low caste Kanjari prostitute," but she's written these kafiyan because she has joined Guru Gulab Das, which is a Sikh sect,
Mhm.
a small sect of Sikhs. So my Piro, now she's called, she became Guru Gulab Das's consort as well. And she was born into a Muslim family as well, and had to then fight the conversion, whatever she was doing. But the point is that even the fact is that she could read and write, and she left her verses for us to read today. And she was again around the time of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. So Piro's kafiyan are, those of us who teach gender, we always look at Professor Malhotra's book and talk about Piro's kafiyan. So again, so this is another example of someone even lower in the social order of performers could read and write. Yeah.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Yeah. So now it's my turn, Manish,
I
to
think we should wrap it up now
wrap it
because
up.
it's
Okay.
over an hour.
Well, I think
I
it
mean,
was
you
so
and I
nice
can
to,
go on, but
yeah, we can go on.
for the
If there's
rest,
any questions from the audience, maybe we could take some of those questions. I think
yes.
if you can unmute yourself and ask the question. Um, uh, there are some questions. Thank you, Artika. Um, Artika has said, having read The Dancing Girls of Lahore years ago, I didn't agree with Hira Mandi. Yes, I think Hira Mandi was just over the top, and it didn't show us any glimpse into the real life of these Lahori courtesans, which was such a shame. That's my opinion. Uh, is there is
The
there
music is great.
the music is great, yeah, if you don't look at the videos. I think you should see see the videos without the music because the lip syncing is off. But if anyone
That
wants
is
to come on and unmute themselves or say or ask a question, you're most welcome. We have time, some time to do that now, after the disasters of the in the middle of the call, which for which I apologize again. Um, yeah, I think I've discovered
okay.
there
That's a
is
wrap.
we should wrap, but I just say one thing that, as someone who is an Indian Punjabi, to see something about Lahori courtesan, then of course I did this research because I was interested in the music of my ancestors and the cultural life. But uh, Pakistani, the 20th century history of music in Pakistan is so interesting, and it would have been so much nicer if there was some like proper input on, for example, Hira Mandi from Pakistani commentators. I've discovered female singers like Gulbahar Bano from on YouTube, who is a beautiful singer now again. And I don't know if she comes from a courtesanly background, but she comes from a performing background, uh, and she's not had an easy life. Uh, but her songs are beautiful. She sings, and she's from Multan. She sings in Saraiki. She sings in Urdu. And I think Mukhtar Begum, Farida Khanum, there's so much music in Punjabi which needs to be discovered. And in some ways, it needs to also be the legacy of these Punjabi courtesans needs to be remembered and preserved. Otherwise, we will only stay with uh, this negative image which the reformers and the colonial writers have left us with. So maybe we can end with reading something from your wonderful book, Manish. I would like to read the last something in the end, where you talk about your mother saying, सबकी अपनी अपनी मजबूरी होती है. Everyone has their constraints. I do not condemn sex work, but I worked hard to live my life with a little respect and dignity which came with being a tawaif. It gave me motivation to live with my head held high. Perhaps the other kind of work would not have given me the same feeling. I had seen the girls in Sonagachi, which is the red light district of Calcutta, living in worse conditions than us. I did not want to be a slave to some pimp, some madame, or even the patrons who could dictate to us. I had agency as a Tawaif. I had my own room. I had a choice to perform in the kota, in hotel rooms, on stage functions. I had a loyal audience, adulation, and most importantly, money to improve the lives of my siblings for better, for the better. I even had a choice in the man I wanted to be seen with. Puri Azadi, full freedom. I think that's such a powerful message. And thank you for writing the book and bringing her story to so many of us. And I think, you're being witness to that story and to that, not just of your mother, but of everyone around her. So I think you are like Iqbal Hussain in Lahore, who is from a family of courtesans and who is, making paintings and writing about them as well in a similar way. He's in Hiramandi. So thank you so much, Manish.
Thank you, Radha. And that was wonderful how you gave us a lowdown and something that perhaps a lot of us, including me, have learned about the history of the courtesans since a long time. And that's something that should uh, reflect now in our literature, in our cinema, uh, and maybe give us a better understanding of their lives.
Absolutely. I think that's a great note to end the conversation on. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Joining.
Bye.
I hope you have a good day. Bye.
Good day. Bye.